Okay. I'm totally off track now. But this story is actually going to go back a little bit further than what I originally was anticipating. I was just going to talk about the process by which we create a public-private partnership through a contract mechanism, a long-term contract where the developer ends up owning the facility and having entire responsibility for carrying out a biosolids program. But actually, in looking at the theme of the presentation, like what are the drivers, what are the forces that direct a choice of technology, that I realized that it actually had its roots much further back, and that it's really hard. It's hard to stand here today and say this wasn't a foregone conclusion. Like the path seems, oh yes, obvious that this is where we should end up, but nuh-uh. And I would also say that drivers way back when were so critically important and so different from what we have today that to some extent it's almost unrecognizable. And the number one thing there is the importance of federal government and federal laws and federal regulations and federal policy in directing the biosolids program. Philadelphia would have not done anything, I swear, would have done nothing, and actually tried to do nothing, but for the important role of the federal government in defining the rules of the game. And what that was stemmed from the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of '72 and the Marine Protection Sanctuaries Act that followed thereon, and it ended the practice of ocean disposal. But even so, what we were starting with was a practice which was not a high-tech, and we were building upon a 50-year history of having facilities that were originally intended to be built in 1908 that weren't built until 1953. And we had collected biosolids for 15 years before we even chose to do ocean disposal. So we were not an agency that was cutting edge or on the edge of something new. But what forced our hand was the EPA coming in and saying, you're not going to get permission to renew your ocean disposal permit until you develop a master plan for land-based utilization of your biosolids. And that's what they compelled the city to do in the early 1970s. And in 1976, when I first became aware of biosolids, because I became a stakeholder as part of the Regional Planning Commission, on plans to do land application of liquid sludges and then later mine reclamation in the region. And that was because the city then had hired a whole stable of new engineers with ideas that were charged with excitement, and they were charged with finding a way of ending the practice of ocean disposal just off of Cape May and Cape Henlopen, and doing some really exciting, innovative research. And I picked up this one because it's the one thing that's still a trace on the internet. Eco-Rock. I was there at Eco-Rock. Eco-Rock was a thermal process. They called it incineration and encapsulation of incinerator residue. And they mixed, believe it or not, they mixed incinerator ash with sewage sludge and then processed it thermally to create an aggregate. And you realize in 1977, the promise was that this secret, classified Department of Defense project would be officially open and scheduled by early 1983. That was a huge promise in 1977. But that was, I mean, can you imagine the Department of Defense, and the EPA and a public agency working together on what they could consider a classified sludge process? Okay. A very different atmosphere back then, but Eco-Rock was one of the 10 master plan points that was developed in the mid-70s. Thankfully, we don't have an Eco-Rock system in place. But what did come up, we had a pilot compost facility, and we also had a plan to centralize dewatering. And the centralization of dewatering is also perhaps one of the peculiar decisions, one that would not normally expect to be the choice of an agency such as ours. But in this case, the Northeast plant, which was the largest plant in our system, was practically adjoining a large industrial plant whose discharge of odorous liquids into our sewer was such a nuisance for us to handle and a nuisance for the community that the thought of any risk from odors from biosolids processing was completely unimaginable. So the result was a choice to barge liquid sludges from the northeast plant down to the southwest plant, the second largest plant near the airport, where there's already an existing facility for unloading, and create a centralized facility. It also didn't hurt that the city had at one time 800 acres of land in that vicinity for huge sludge lagoons. I guess they were using Chicago as the model at the time. And because of that, we had area capable of developing a compost facility. Now, Philadelphia wasn't totally outside the realm of influence of the EPA, who was exceedingly enthusiastic about Beltsville method of composting. The USDA had developed this. The EPA was like the champion of it. They had convinced DC Water and also Washington Suburban to engage in biosolids composting, and we wanted our own. And EPA wanted us to have our own. And they were willing to pay an 85% grant to build it. Another example of the influence of the federal government at the time on the choice of biosolids programs. A major driver was, in this case, the EPA. However, we had like a minimal time to get the job done, and the process was designed and by folks who didn't know what they were doing. So one of the other things you have to look at is what is the balance in a public agency between the sort of the financial considerations for what is how you capitalize on opportunities financially versus the benefit of scrutinizing the technology for its proven track record. We were in a situation where honest to God, I read as a non-city employee, I read the. Yes. Okay.
So you were good. It was the wrong slide.
Thank you very much. So we had a change in management at the compost plant, and we started working through all of the details of the problems that we're facing. I already mentioned the odors were totally misjudged, but let me also emphasize, if I could set the context, we brought in 200 backhoe operators and truck drivers, blue-collar workers from all over city government, and we put a 20-year-old something or other professional engineer in charge of them all. We had a guy wearing a tie and another guy wearing his white suit, his gold rings, and his bowler hat, okay, who was the supervisor for the blue-collar workers. Okay, we were totally unable to make cultures work on the operation of this plant. We were the engineers trying to run the plant had absolutely zero control over how that compost was being made. Simultaneously, we had fundamental mistakes with the way the aeration was designed to be delivered to the compost, such that we'd never have aerated compost. It was always going to be anaerobic. It was going to be the dominant form of decomposition of the compost, leaving lots of odors. Can you imagine an operation where you're mixing compost 24/7, essentially? Every day we have 2,000 cubic yards of material to move around. Every day. And it was just not possible to be managing that amount of material with the kind of space that we had. We also had nobody in city government, nobody in our stable had ever operated centrifuges before. Okay, so we were the operators were choosing to shut down the centrifuges during their coffee breaks, and then start them up again, and then between shifts shut them down and start them up again. We were dealing with 12% sludge at best in mixing up make compost. So you cannot imagine just how hard the composting process was. But the thing that had really changed was that the odor regulations that we're governed under had changed also. and we were compelled to spend about $1 million on odor studies, cutting edge odor research. I mean, this is my passion. And the new manager brought in total quality improvement, they brought in labor relations, they brought in a whole set of cost effectiveness measures in order to understand what were we going to do to make improvements. But despite 3 years of intensive management, we came to the conclusion that no matter how much better the anaerobic digesters became, no matter how much we reduced the workforce from 231 down to 135, no matter the fact we spent millions and millions replacing our centrifuges, and we trialed $1 million worth of new aeration systems, we would not fix the problem. That gave us, they gave the commissioner, who did not forget, every good reason to revise the RFP process for privatization. We had a team, a fairly good team, and by that we were all very experienced in biosolids technologies. And we drove a proposal for how we were going to proceed with soliciting proposals for replacement technologies. And a team that included the law department, included procurement, included financial people in law, in finance, and in various authorities. We had the city government, with the primary goal that we would be able to reassign all of the employees as well as keep costs at approximately the same level. This was a couple slides from a presentation made in 2005 that was used to sell the concept of going forward with the RFQ results. I gave some of the background. Let me also call out, is anybody from Veolia here?
I was at the time.
At the time. Okay. So if you were to go back to Kevin Nelson, who's still a Veolia employee and still guiding things, he will tell you one of the most shocking things in his life was realizing that he was the reason why Synagro got the contract. He had come to the city, our commissioner, the one who did not forget, and made a pitch. He made a pitch that got the ball rolling. He made a pitch that they could take on, doing an entirely Class A facility, be owned by them, and they would be reducing costs, guarantee no odors, and get the job done within 2 years. And it was like, yes, bring it on. So US Filter was sort of the source of it. They became the long pathway to Veolia, but that US Filter was coming at the time. The RFQ was put together. We also drew upon CDM as our consultant to put together some of the RFP material. But fundamentally, the entire package was put together by city employees from the team that was created in the city. CDM helped us with some of the review of the results. The RFQ went out in 2003. Proposals. We among the requirements was that we have bring on a contractor capable of operating our facility during the interim between Class B and Class A development. That they show that they had the experience with the technologies which we had sorted out into being drying and composting, and that they'd be able to demonstrate they could have the financial capabilities to develop this facility.
Hey Bill, strangely, a question for me. Did you actually go through a master planning process, or that was kind of shortcutted right into?
We were shortcutted. We did not do a master plan. We were the master plan. The employees there were the master plan. We had, all through this effort of trying to understand how we could fix and upgrade our facility, had done a lot of background work throughout the country on who was doing what where. It did help that there were a few leaders in this. I mean, Chicago had brought on a US Filter Veolia facility for dryer. There was examples of, I guess even Synagro in Hawaii was already. Baltimore? Oh yeah, Baltimore was the key example. So there were we had already a pretty good stable background information on what we were going to try to accomplish moving forward. As a result of putting out the RFP, we had 4 qualified national firms that responded. Through the internal review as well as CDM review, the 2 that were selected to go to a final proposal was US Filter, the troublemakers, I'm sorry, and Synagro.
You're on record now.
Okay? And a fairly quick turnaround, we got the proposals back, and US Filter did not submit. Later on, Kevin would tell me that they fought and fought and fought, but US Filter at the time had just become a Veolia or Vivendi company, I can't remember the name of it now, and their French owners just did not have the appetite to take on so large a project and so large a risk. And that left Synagro, which had its challenges too, because if you're in city government and you only have one proposal, it is hard to move forward with confidence that you're going to get the right price, the right deal. And this Dennis Blair, who was at the Water Department, who's in the Division of Planning and Research, which is not an operations project, and it provided a sort of a division of labor. Operators, as you can understand, some of us felt very threatened by the whole process. Dennis Blair was certainly among those who was the commissioner's champion to accomplish this. The proposal that came to us, as you see, involves Synagro as the primary leader, but it also includes some important contributors from the minority business side of it. And it came with the heating equipment, the drying equipment was specified. CH2 was not the final engineer on this thing, right? But that was proposed in 2005. It was also key, I think, in this, in terms of who is the expert, who is driving the expectations for the contract. This document, the service agreement, was prepared internally, primarily by the law department solicitors who worked in the offices of the Water Department, working with us on all the details. We would never, those of us who were operational people, were never held back from reviewing and understanding the scope of the work that was being sought. And I think that was key because it helped us avoid big gaps and big question marks about what we thought we were going to need and where the risks were, and where the balancing of the risks were, which was a key part of it. The goal was to have a facility up and running in 3 to 5 years, and to have this contract good for 20 years, and it'd be paid for and built by the contractor. The goal was also to keep the price at approximately the current going price for city operation of its largely Class B program, but with composting. That was also a tall order, I think. Also, that the financing be primarily led outside of city government. There's a couple things going on in city government. We're already at our sort of debt limits for major projects. There was a big program coming on green infrastructure, a lot of money that had to be spent on the water filtration plants. So it was a serious issue that we be able to finance this off books for the department. The other serious issue, there was limits on hiring in city government, and so the redeployment of the city workers was a major aspect, a major benefit that the city government saw in concluding this contract. And we had to find a mechanism to do this. At city government, we usually have 3-year contracts at the maximum. So we resurrected something called the municipal authority to help with the finance. And but they worked with the instruments in state and city government to find the money for that. Labor was a serious issue, and I have to say that the relationship that Synagro was able to develop with representatives of the blue-collar workers was actually ended up proving to be a critical part of getting the whole thing going, because it ended up at the end of the day there was not a serious opposition from city employees, despite the fact that 10 years before it would have been explosive. Everybody was reassigned to places they wanted to be, and that turned out to be an important part of getting the whole thing to work. We did continue to see information brought to the city leaders and to the city council, which had to approve the contract, and these were some of the questions. And these continue to be good questions and continue to be things that we all need to think about in our current work. Is it necessary to go to Class A? That was a decision that was sort of made by, by the commissioner. We want a Class A program. We don't want Class B. I had been arguing that our Class B program is very cost effective and we had a good market for it. Did you want to really abandon having 5 programs and end up with one product with primarily one outlet? 25 years is a long time to decide to use one technology. Does that make sense given how fast technology changes? At the time that they signed the contract, natural gas was $12 a decatherm. That was huge price. It's now down to 2. At the time, it was a big risk. The city was bearing the cost of the energy. Was that a reasonable risk to take on? Some of us thought that the centrifuges would wear out really fast, and that there was the projected time frame for replacement of capital was totally underestimated by the contractor. And we always felt that our true costs of operations were far less than was being represented as the basis against which this contract was being compared. But nevertheless, we went into a transition period. In 2008, July of 2008, we were getting ready to transfer over, and I guess the real concern to avoid vandalism, because there was a thought that there would be a concern for that. Actually, let me if I could back up, some of the people up there, everybody still knows because they're still involved in some way or another. And this comes from the website for Synagro, showing the Philadelphia renewable biofuels. And with that, I get to turn it over to Pam, who can tell us what happened after we transitioned over. And if I can find your presentation.
Wait, which button is forward?
I don't know.
I want to go backwards.
We need to stop my recording and start your recording. So don't talk yet.